Hey guys, it's Allie. Welcome back to Infertile AF, the podcast. This is episode 78 called Victoria. Okay, before we get started, I just wanted to remind everybody, in case you are going through this journey and you are looking for support, head on over to Fertility Rally. This is the business I started with Blair from Fab Fertility, and it is so awesome, guys. It is a community. It's got content. We have curated events. We have a Wednesday night support group that has become my favorite thing of the week. Special guests always and special themes. We have over 200 members now, and we would love for you to join us. So head on over to fertilityrally.com. Check out membership options. There's a bunch of different ones. And let me know if you have any questions. We would love to rally with you. Okay, so today I'm so excited that I'm talking to Victoria Nino, who you might know on Instagram as Expecting Anything. She is super open about her motherhood through infertility journey. She's a donor egg mama to her adorable girl, Florence, or baby Flo baby, as she calls her. And Victoria and I met when we were on a panel in the spring, which seems like a million years ago now, but kind of the beginning of the lockdown, the pandemic. We were on a panel about secondary infertility for Hey Mama, and we just hit it off, and I thought she was so cool and I loved her vibe. So I wanted her to share her full story here. So she also wrote a book recently called Why I'm Glad My Eggs Didn't Work, which I will link to on my Instagram, which is at Infertile AF Stories. So today we are going to get into all the shit that she has gone through, including being diagnosed with stage 3 endometriosis, going through medicated IUIs, IVF, finding out that she needed to go with donor eggs and how that all shook out with her husband and if they were on the same page and how they finally did get to be on the same page. A spiritual experience in Thailand that I'll let her explain because she can do it better than me. And then what happened when she did find a donor and they did a transfer. So I am going to let her give you guys all the details, but I just want to thank Victoria for everything. I love this story. It's so inspiring. So without further ado, this is Victoria's infertility story.
Let's start at the beginning. Did you always want to have kids?
No, it's funny that you asked that. I didn't. And I feel sometimes guilty saying that now after all that I've been through. But I think in my 20s, early 20s, I was very much like, I'm going to be a career woman. I don't need a man. I don't need kids. You know, I was always so focused on just making something for myself that I just didn't feel like, you know, I think I was just too on my high horse. Like I don't need any of those things to feel like my true self, you know, or feel purpose of anything in life. I think I later realized like you can do both, you know, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but I think for me, that pivot happened after I met my husband, and we got married when I was 29, and he always wanted kids. He was like meant to be a dad from day one of his life. I feel like, and he was just born for being a father. Mm-hmm. And was always very open about like, you know, I want kids. And I just, you know, fell in love with him, and his desire sort of like led me to also see that vision with him, you know? Mm-hmm. And so we started trying right away. Like, I got married, I was 29, he's 5 years older than I am. Mm-hmm. And we just, it's funny, you know, I feel like everyone who's infertile always says like, do you remember when you had that timeline?
Totally.
And it's like, we're going to be like, I was like, we can't have sex, you know, unprotected sex during our honeymoon because we need more time. Like, let's plan the baby for this month to be born in this month. And I mean, it's just insane.
Yeah. Because you're like, it has to be at the perfect time. I can't right. be pregnant for so-and-so's wedding because then I can't drink. Right. So, you know, we don't want to be on vacation at this point. Like there's all the minutia.
Right. Which seems so ridiculous now that I even like thought that was possible. But like I said, we started trying right away. But we also said we were trying, but not trying, you know, whatever we got that means. And then I think I was probably 31-ish when I thought, okay, something's up. Like, this is weird, and I'd started to get more serious about tracking ovulation and that sort of thing. And maybe I want to say by the age of 32, I went in because I'd started to talk to my OBs about like my periods were really long and painful. And I had so many people tell me like, that's just the way you're made up. Like everybody's period's different. And like, this is just your life. And I'm like, okay, so I bleed half my life. Like this doesn't seem right.
Yeah. So you hadn't been pregnant at all, right?
Never, no. But I also knew my period was not normal, or at least later I realized that. I talked to more friends and I'm like, wait, no, most people don't have their period for 2 weeks, or, you're not like bleeding a crime scene.
Right.
You're not bleeding out of your butthole. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
That's not normal. And so I finally had one OB who sort of said, okay, something's up. Like you need to go to a fertility doctor, in which we then realized like after a laparoscopy that I had endometriosis.
But you never knew that before?
Nope.
Wow.
So that I think I was age 32, 33 when I found that out, when we were like, okay, we really want a kid. And so we did like I said, the procedure and went in and scraped it out. It was stage 3, which is pretty bad, and then later found out it had sort of eaten away at all my eggs.
Wow.
But at the time we were still full of hope and let's just try IUI, let's stimulate, as many follicles as we can. My husband's sperm was pretty decent. So we did IUI 5 times. And just, the new hope every 30 days.
Right. Were you doing them back to back to back?
We did. Yeah. And some of them started as like trying to be IVF, and then I'd only get 1 egg. So the doctor would say, well, let's just do IUI. We don't want to waste it.
Okay. So you were doing like medicated IUIs?
Oh yeah. Yeah. All
Okay.
5. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the first one, of course, I was for sure I was pregnant. And then the second one, I was like kind of hopeful, but kind of realistic. By the 4th, 5th one, I was like drinking, I was like, this isn't going to work.
Isn't it funny how the bar changes so much? Not the
Yes.
drinking bar, but the bar, like your expectations bar, like,
Oh yeah.
it gets moved here and raised there and lowered there. And like, it's after each one of these like procedures or things that doesn't work, it's like,
right.
Yeah.
And my doctor the whole time, and I love her. I mean, I have a new doctor now, but at the time she was what I needed, and she would hug me and cry with me. But she always would say like, but you're so young. You're my baby. You're like one of my babies. You're so young, because I was 33, 34 at the time. And then of course, when all of this was just not working, she's like, okay, let's give IVF 1 shot. You finally got 2 eggs to grow, which most people would never do an IVF retrieval with only 2 follicles or 2 eggs. But that was the most I ever had. Like 2 was a big number for me. So we sort of seized the day, and they, neither of them fertilized. One of them was actually like the color black, she said, because it was so bad.
Really?
Yeah.
So how did that feel? Like, how are you doing emotionally through all this? This is a lot.
Oh, rough. I mean, but I'm also one of those people that like, I feel like I can fix anything, and I can like, I'll always find a way. Like, I've always had a really strong work ethic and owned multiple businesses and have a full-time job at the same time. And I've always been a person that's like, I'm going to persevere. I'm going to figure this out. I'd cry, but then I'd like brush my shoulders off and like get back up and be like, okay, let's try this now, But I think with that with that final Hail Mary with the IVF, I knew going into it, like it was probably not going to work. And so I had already started researching donor eggs. I didn't even tell my husband. I was like reading blogs and reading articles and reaching out to women on Instagram. And, I was like, well, this could work. This could be my, this could be my way. Like I could still carry a baby. I'd learned about epigenetics and how like I'd still influence the genes and have that sort of connection. And I had like already set myself up for like, this is my next step if this doesn't work. I always needed like a catch-all, like a plan B.
Right. Can we back up just a little bit? I'd love to hear about when you started trying to find people on the blogs and on Instagram. Was there a community at this point? Because I know like things have been changing so much in the last year.
Oh my gosh,
so was it hard to find people?
Yes. Like
okay.
I I didn't know anyone that did donor eggs. I was finding a lot of women like infertility, but they were mostly through friends. Like, I told one friend and she was like, oh yeah, did you know so-and-so did too? And I'm like, wait, what? So I started connecting with just other women through friends of friends, like so-and-so's sister-in-law or whatever. But none of them had been through donor eggs. So they were able to connect with like the grief of infertility and IVF and how hard it is and pregnancy jealousy and all of that. But I couldn't find one person that had been through donor eggs. All I had was my doctor who would tell me about her patients, and the success and sort of the bonding. And like, she was the only person aside from like, eventually we had to go through therapy and stuff. She was really the only person I talked to about it.
Okay. So were you already kind of thinking like that might be the route that you were going to go down?
That was my plan B. Yeah. I was like, maybe we'll just get one. All we need is one. That's what they say. But I still was like, okay, but this will be my next step. But, in hindsight, I probably should have been having those conversations with my husband, because when we had our meeting with the doctor after it all failed, that was her suggestion. And he was like, no way, we would never do that. And I was like, what do you mean we would never do that? And he's like, well, no, I married you. I want to have a baby with you. Like, this is no. And I was like, yes, like we need to consider this. Like, he's like, no, the doctor said we could do another round and we could do this and that. And I said, no, I am so done. I'm closing that door, and he was just like, well, I need time to think about this. And, cause I'd done my own research, and if someone had just told me for the first time, I probably would have said no too,
Sure. That's a huge pivot. Right.
So he had to sort of like grieve that too. And I think a part of me is like, well, what do you have to grieve? You still get to carry on your genetics, but it's not about that. Like, it was a grief for him too, that this was like, a total shift in what the vision was that he had. So we went through that grieving process, which, I recently wrote a book about all of that, because people are always sort of asking me like, how do you grieve your genetics? And it's a real thing. You have to make space for that. You have to like cry and be angry and let it sort of be grieved, because it is a real loss. But I always tell people, like, you can't realistically expect to grieve it fully. Like, that's just not realistic. And I also think you never really grieve anything fully, right? Like, even if you lose a grandmother or a pet or whatever, like, there's still going to be something that happens where you're like, oh, I miss that person, or you're triggered in some way. And so my theory has always been like, if you can at least half-ass it, like grieve 51% maybe of the way, then, you've done a pretty good job. But you've got to at least dedicate some, time and effort to that grieving process.
Definitely. Tell me a little bit more about the book. Is it called Why I'm Glad My Eggs Didn't Work?
Yes, it is.
That's a great title.
I played around with a few titles, but I was like, you know what? This is the sum of this story. It's like, exactly. In hindsight, like I'm so grateful that all of this happened. And, when I was in the thick of it, I was not grateful.
Right.
But, back to my like point in the beginning, when I had this perfect plan of my life and timeline, like a lot of things in my life sort of came easy to me. And I was the girl that you probably would have hated on Facebook, because it seemed like my life was perfect. And, when I finally came out about this, I actually had a girl from high school message me and say, I'm so glad to know your life isn't perfect. And
oh,
like,
God. Right.
Yeah. And I'm like, God, was I really that girl? But I think that this sort of journey has really given me a lot of like just perspective on life and empathy and compassion, and
totally
taught me a lot of lessons I wouldn't have learned any other way.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear a little bit more about just the grieving process of like, so when you decide that you are going to use donor eggs, is it like a grieving process like that you go through where you're like typical steps, or like, what are some of the thoughts that you were having in your mind that somebody who's listening to this might be able to relate to?
So I think the biggest thing is like, you have this vision of like your spouse or your partner's best traits and your best traits, right? Like, that's just how you think it's going to happen, right? Like, my blue eyes, his tan skin, my long legs, his good smile. Like, literally you're like, this is going to be the baby, right?
Right. Of course.
And so I think you first have to grieve that, right? It's like this imagined child that you've painted in your mind is going to be what it's going to be. And so you have to like sort of acknowledge the fact that that is not going to happen. However, I will say that like no one has control over DNA, right? Even when it is your own, no one has control over it. And so I think I had to like really understand that like that vision was actually not real anyway. Chances are his brown eyes would have canceled out my blue, right? Like a lot of the things that I think I had put in this like picture of like what the baby will be, that I had to just like be sad about that for a bit, you know, because it's sad. It's like there's this idea of like this mini me not being able to move, you know, forward, or like things about my dad or my mom or my grandmother that I wanted to pass on, you know, that sort of stops with me. And so I had to just like you would grieve a grandmother or a brother or a family member, like you got to just let it out. You have to, you know, cry, scream, punch something. Like you sort of just have to allow that time. You know, some people will create little altars or ceremonies or plant a tree. Like there's a lot of things that you can do to sort of like honor that vision not happening. I had like written a letter to sort of that future baby, like letting him or her go. You know, I think you just have to like honor the space for that.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important that you point out that this is a tangible like thing to grieve. Like I think some people don't, you know, like as women, I've said this so many times in various circumstances, but we don't give ourselves, like we do ourselves a disservice by not validating the pain that we're going through. And this is a huge one. And I think some people be like, oh, it's not a real thing to grieve. There wasn't actually a baby, but you're grieving like what could have been. You're grieving, you know, your hopes for the future. So I think it's definitely important to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, and I'm not going to say I'm ever fully grieved either. Like, you know, there's times where like maybe someone in our family or a friend will make a comment about my sister's child looking like my dad or my mom or something like that. Like, I don't get that, you know, but it's crazy because I think like, you know, I talk about this sometimes, but our donor actually, she looks quite a bit like me.
Yes. You said that in the group that we were in together.
Yeah. And she's actually fairer skin color. Her eyes were like crystal blue, really blonde, natural hair. Her children all were sort of towhead blonde, you know. And my daughter is darker than my husband, you know. Yeah. And so a part of me is like, well, even if maybe they had been my genetics, who knows? Like it probably wouldn't have been anything, you know, like I think it's actually sort of been easier for me because she literally is a clone of my husband that, you know, it's just like, I don't know. I feel like my blue eyes were never going to be there or my, you know, whatever.
Can you explain the whole epigenetics like piece of the puzzle? Because I don't know much about that.
Yes, I'm very fascinated by epigenetics and have sort of been out there ruffling feathers about this topic because I feel very passionately about it. So there's this whole idea, obviously, of nurture versus nature, right? And nature comes from DNA and nurture comes from environment and, you know, just the way that we sort of raise our children, but also nurturing starts within the womb. Epigenetics is the idea of an influence. So meaning that because I, you know, grew my child from, you know, an embryo to a human life, I had some influence over the way her genes were expressed. So what that means is, you know, she has a widow's peak, for example. I have a widow's peak. The donor did not. My husband does not, and his family, the donor, you know, I've scoured through photos of her family history. It doesn't appear that anyone had a widow's peak. I turned that gene on. So they're kind of like light switches. And because I'm the carrier, I get to influence, you know, the way things are passed on. Because my placenta decided exactly what DNA was chosen. Meaning, like, if Florence's embryo was carried by the donor, it wouldn't be Florence. Right?
That's
because
so
embryos,
cool.
We forget that embryos aren't humans. They're not they're living organisms, they're not living people.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of work that still has to go into place. Like my body had to switch on thousands of genes at just the right time and the perfectly right cells to create her.
Mm-hmm.
And so 3 people technically made her. And I'm one of them. I'm one of the I'm not just like, there used to be this old school of thought that you're just an oven for baking the cookies, right? You're just the oven, right? But it's not that at all. There's very much this biological tie that really scientists don't know enough about yet, but there's been enough studies to prove that there's this epigenetic control that, comes from nurture. So, some scientists will even say that I am her biological mother because in terms of biology, like I gave her all that she needed to be created into a human, whereas the donor is the genetic donor. No one's really sort of defined like these definitions and what they all are. Like, I use the term gestational mother, but I think it's important that the word mother comes from a place of intention, right? And the donor in all of these definitions and examples never had an intention to mother, right?
Right.
So she never gets that title. Whereas in some examples, like if you use a sister or a cousin or a best friend who's going to be in their life, like you may say that, she's the genetic mother. But in our scenario that, she had, I've actually tried to contact her. That's a whole nother podcast to see if she would be open to contact, but she wants nothing to do with us. And so that's not a mother. Right.
Right.
And so, it's just that she was the donor. She gave me an egg, a cell, right? But I did all the work to turn that cell into a human. And, I gave her my inner energy, which, I think is something that people don't talk about enough, but for 10 whole months, I nurtured her from the inside,
Wow. That's so interesting and cool. And I really don't know anything about this.
Yes. It's another thing to look up is MicroRNA, epigenetics. Okay. If anyone's listening, those are things to search for if you're trying to find information. But I've done a lot of research, and I've also, my first doctor, she was a big advocate of epigenetics and had told me multiple scenarios of, I'll tell you one, because I think this is a real game changer when I heard the story, but this particular woman and man came in, had used donor eggs. The woman was Irish and had red hair, pointy nose, freckles. The husband was Italian or Hispanic, I forget, but dark skin. And their donor was blonde hair, blue eyes, olive skin. And all 3 babies, she ended up having 3, had red hair, pointy nose, freckles.
Wow.
So tell me
right.
how that happened. But it's just, I see it. I see it in my daughter all the time. Like people always say, like, we have the same mouth, we have the same nose.
You posted that picture recently of your squinty eye that you said you used to not like in pictures, but she has the same thing, which I thought was so beautiful and cool. Yeah, we both have the same squinty eye. We have the widow's peak. My daughter, our donor was sort of like on the shorter end of height, where height is in my family. Like we're all very tall and long legs, and Florence is 95th percentile for height. Mm-hmm. And my husband doesn't have height on his side either. So I believe that I influenced that, and so they're just little things that I call my mama magic, and I'll tell her like, look, that's your mama magic, Oh, I love that. So this has got to be a little bit controversial, right?
It is, because there's therapists out there. Like I literally had one therapist tell me like, you should not be talking to your child about this.
Wow.
But if it's a scientific fact, absolutely, I'm going to talk to her about that.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget what she said to me. She said, but then doesn't it sort of diminish the credit of a woman using a surrogate? And I'm like, but we all have our own connections to our children, right? We all have our own stories. And again, it comes back to intention. Like with surrogacy, the intention starts with the egg, right? Whereas in my example, the intention starts with the pregnancy, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm a mother, the woman using surrogacy, she's also a mother, and they're just very different, journeys, to get there, and different influence.
Mm-hmm. That is so interesting. Hold that thought. On this episode, I'm super proud to partner with Thrive Cosmetics, an independent, woman-founded and owned beauty brand that specializes in high-performance makeup and skincare that is vegan and cruelty-free. You guys know how much I'm obsessed with female-owned companies and female founders and how I love to support other female-led businesses. And Thrive is one of those. And it's awesome for a few different reasons. Number one, their mission is to be bigger than beauty, which means for every purchase, they donated much needed products and funds to nonprofit partners nationwide who are helping women facing significant challenges to thrive again. Number two, their products. They're amazing. I got a whole bunch of them the other day. I love their Defying Gravity eye lifting cream, which really depuffs and tightens your eye area. But OMG, I'm now obsessed with their best-selling Liquid Lash Extensions Mascara, which adds length and volume and makes you look super hot. This is the mascara you might have heard about that's sold every 5 seconds, which has more than 7,000 5-star reviews, and which won Glamour's Best Clean Beauty Product of 2020 award for the best mascara. I was wearing it the other day, and Ever even said, "Mom, are you wearing fake lashes?" The other thing I love is that their products, like I said, are 100% vegan and cruelty-free. They never test on animals, and they are even PETA certified. So the best news, guys, is you get 15% off just for being an Infertile AF listener. Go to thrivecosmetics.com/InfertileAF for 15% off your first purchase. You can start thriving and help women in need today by going to thrivecosmetics.com. It's spelled THRIVECAUSEMETICS.com/InfertileAF for 15% off your purchase. Thanks, guys. Do you guys remember the moment that you did both decide to do it and that you were going to go down this path, like no turning back?
You know what? I don't know if I remember the moment.
Because there might not have been a moment, right? It might have just been.
I think it was over time. I think we kept talking about it. We take little steps. Like, I'm like, well, let's just log on, because you have to, it's literally like Match.com. You go on and you're surfing the web for these young women.
Right.
And we would like pour a glass of wine and be like, okay, let's have fun with this, Sure. And but you also like find yourself, I remember feeling like really icky because I was like, well, she, her GPA was this, or I don't know about her teeth, or, you're like,
yeah,
hold on a second. Like, who am I to judge? Like I had to put myself in their shoes. Like, now, if you've seen me in my early 20s and I was on here, like there's a lot of things they would have picked apart about me.
It's so true though. And I'm glad you said that, because it's, you do have to be judgmental because you're judging your future child basically, or,
right.
So it's a weird line that I think you probably feel, like you said, you feel bad about, picking them apart, but it's also like, but that's what you're doing. That's what you're there for, to do. So.
Right. And so it's hard not to get wrapped up in that, because these profiles are intense. It's like photos at all ages,
right.
Like medical history, religious beliefs, blood type, favorite movie, favorite color. It's like, okay, It just gets overwhelming. And
what were you guys using in terms of your search? Was there like one place that you went, or was there a bunch? Or if we could break it down a little bit, I'd love that.
Yeah. So there's donor agencies, which we went through a donor agency. And at the time I was looking at, I think 4 of them, which was probably too many.
Yeah.
I had to log into like 4 different ones. We ended up going with Elite Fertility.
Okay.
We actually had our first donor that we chose, ended up not working out the day before her retrieval.
Okay. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So after we had sort of, come to terms with this, finally, like, okay. And literally everyone in the doctor's office is celebrating, like, okay, you're going to have your baby now. Like, this donor eggs, this is the magic wand,
Yeah. Yeah.
We get the donor, and she was anonymous. We had never met her. And, our doctor's calling us, giving us the updates and the play-by-play, like, things are looking good. Like, she's got a lot of follicles. Like, we should be able to retrieve in the next 4 or 5 days, the next 3 days, like, we're talking. So the day before her retrieval, my doctor calls me, and I'll never forget that moment. My husband and I were sitting in the car in like the Home Goods parking lot. And she's like, "Hey guys, I just wanted to call you about the egg retrieval." We're like, "Okay, well, we just like talked to you yesterday."
Mm-hmm.
She's like, "Yeah, well, I have some good news and some bad news." And we're like, "Okay, well, what's the good news?" And she said, "Well, the good news is that your donor is very much like you, Victoria. We've always said she talks like you, she looks like you, she's like, her mannerisms, everything is just like you. But the bad news is that her eggs are like you too." I was like,
"Oh, wow."
and I was like, I remember just like bawling, like, what do you mean? Like, how is this even possible? Like, this was our Hail Mary,
Yeah.
And she said, I don't know what happened. I don't understand it. I now have to have conversations with her about her own fertility. She was 26, I think, at the time. She said, but she had, I think, 4 eggs. And, if it were my own, I'd be like, yeah, let's do this. 4,
Sure.
like, great. But when you're paying all of this money and all, like, there's, you have to think about, if she has 4 eggs, let's say 2 fertilize, and then genetic testing, maybe we get 1 or 2, but we knew we needed more tries than that, right? Like,
yeah,
like to put all that in for 1 embryo, like that's hard,
Right.
And so she was like, yeah, 4 is not enough. And I'm like, great. Okay. And then of course I just felt this overwhelming sadness for this poor girl who, thought she was doing such an amazing thing. And
Right.
Like now she has to be faced with this.
Yes.
So I grieve for her too,
Were you able to talk to her afterwards, or is it like,
no, I wish.
Yeah.
I sent her a card, a letter in the mail, but never heard back.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's when I really like went to my dark place. Like, cause we thought, okay, we finally got on board with this. And then that didn't work either. We start to feel this like, well, am I not meant to be a mother? Is this like a sign? Like, what does this mean? And so we were like, all right, we got to take a break from this. And it took a very long, like a year.
Okay.
And we just started putting trips on credit cards. Like, we were already maxed out from all this other stuff, but we were like, YOLO, like we got to just
YOLO. Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. Yeah. That makes perfect sense.
And so we did we went to Mexico, Virgin Islands, we went to Thailand, and I had this like really spiritual experience in Thailand. And I'm not religious by any means. But we went to this temple and I saw a monk sitting there, and you could like sit with the monk and like, he would sort of like bless you, or I didn't really understand it, to be honest. I was just like, that looks cool. And it started raining. And I told my husband, I was like, I gotta go sit with that guy. And he's like, Victoria, it's pouring raining. I was like, I know, but like, I feel like this is like something I just got to do. He's like, okay, go over there. Just do you. So I sit with this monk in the pouring rain, and he like waves this like thing over my head, like, I don't know, like a stick. And monks don't talk. If you know anything about monks, they don't speak. And he was just sort of grunting, and he's like communicating to me through grunts and this like stick over my head in the pouring rain. And I'm like, I feel like he's telling me something. Like, I just had this inner like feeling that like, I got to do this one more time.
Yeah.
And he hands me a bracelet and points to my husband and is grunting like, like, you got to give him this. You guys have to put these bracelets on. And so we did. And I came back to my husband. He's like, we got to go one more time. New doctor, new donor. I have all of this clarity all of a sudden, like one more time.
Wow.
Like, are you sure? And I said, yeah. I said, put the bracelet on. And so, and my husband still to this day has the bracelet. He still has the bracelet.
Oh my God. What does it look like?
It's orange. It's like it's like a friendship bracelet. It's
okay.
It's just like a really skinny, like orange rope.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Mine came off like after Flo was born. I had to cut it off because she shit all over it.
Perfect.
But I was like, this is it. This is full circle right here.
Yeah. You didn't need it anymore.
No, but he still has his on, and he's very, very attached to it. It's
yes.
So yeah, so that's when we came back and got a new doctor and a new donor. And our new doctor was like, look, you can't fall in love with your donor. You don't need to. You just need someone who's fertile and healthy. That could be, maybe a second or third cousin sort of, but don't obsess over the minor details. It's not what this is about. And, you just need to find someone who's going to get you pregnant. Right.
Right.
And I just sort of shifted my frame of thought. And the first donor I was very emotionally connected to, whereas this donor, I was like, you know what? She seems good. She's got 2 kids. She's had success for, another family or 2. She does look like she could be a second cousin. And I was just like, I don't know. I think this is a good one. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm obsessed with her. I'm in love with her. She's my soul sister. Like, it wasn't anything like that. It was just, and she's the one who made me a mother. Right. And I think, I wish earlier on because my first doctor was like, you need to feel something. You need to like on your wedding day, like think about how you felt. And I'm like, what? Like I'm looking at a computer screen of a
with the donor
girl, like that I don't know. Like how,
yes.
And I got hung up on that,
Yeah.
And so our first donor had never done it before. And, unproven donors get women pregnant all the time. But it's a risk, right? But I took that risk and I didn't ask any questions about, her fertility, any of it. I just was so obsessed on her being just like me. And I think looking back to the whole grief thing we talked about earlier, I think I was in denial that, I thought I would just be, it was still me, right? Because she was just like me. I was like, well, I'm just going to sort of like trick the system here because she is me. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas with the second donor, we do look similar if you put us side by side, but nowhere near the resemblance that I had in the first one.
Right. So let me ask you this. Did they like vet these donors before they get into the system? Like, did they know, they obviously didn't know that she had fertility issues, right? Did they?
Right. So they do the normal testing like you and I did, when we were first like exploring IVF, like AMH and FSH and things of that nature. But, I think with the first donor, we still don't know why things happen the way they did. And that's just sort of the risk you take. But yeah, they vet them. They
to
do
a certain degree, right?
To a certain degree. They do blood work. They do a psychological exam. And, there's a lot of it's self-reported too, like family history.
Sure.
That sort of thing.
Yeah. That makes sense. I guess there's only so much they can do,
right.
Time and money wise and just resources wise. So that makes total sense.
Exactly.
Okay. So what happened? So you found this next donor and then what?
And then, so we went through the process. She had 31 eggs retrieved.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know. I was like, whoa, this is great. And then 21 fertilized. 21 fertilized. And then I think, was it 9 or 13? I forget the number, made it through testing, but then we had 3 normal. And I was devastated because I thought, what do you mean? Because, you start with 31 and then I had 3 and I'm like, wait.
Was this eggs or embryos? 3
genetically tested normal embryos.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. And so, that's 3 tries, and I'm like, well, we want 3 kids. What if one doesn't work? And so, but I also was like, but if, that's okay. If we can just get one baby, like we've got 3 tries to do that. And that's, and so we transferred the first one, the strongest one. And that was Florence.
Yes.
Which that was my first transfer I'd ever made it to, after all these years. At the age of 38, I did my first transfer and it worked. And I dropped to my knees when I saw the 2 lines because I'd never seen that before in my entire life. And still can't, it was just like very shocking.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the name Florence? I love it.
So my grandmother, who I'm really close to, who's 97, still living, her middle name is Florence.
Okay.
And she got that name from her grandmother, Florence. And so we wanted to, Florence's middle name, my daughter Florence, is Viola, which is my great aunt, who I was also really close to. So wanted to give her some really strong, female names.
Yes.
On my side of the family too, to tie in, my side too. So she's 2 now. And we recently tried again with the next strongest embryo in March, and that failed. And I actually think that was maybe the hardest thing that I've been through. I don't know. It's hard to compare, but I think I just because it had worked the first time, I just knew like it would work. Like we did all the same things. This embryo was almost as great of quality as Florence's embryo. I just couldn't wrap my head around why it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And I think also too, because I like see the human that this embryo could become. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry, honey. Oh,
it's like a huge loss,
Yeah. Definitely.
That was her sibling. And I feel like I failed her too,
Oh, you didn't at all, but I know what you mean.
It's hard because she doesn't, I wanted her to have like a full biological sibling.
Right.
I want her to have that connection. And
totally.
I know it's not important, right? Like I know DNA is not required to have like the most immense amount of love for someone because I get to live that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also had it again in my mind that this was going to work. And it was just earth shattering. It just felt like I lost a baby.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even genetically mine. So I always tell people, if you're considering this and you're not sure how you're going to love your baby, like let my grief be like proof that you can be so madly in love with something that has 0 parts of your DNA.
Absolutely.
Without even have ever met.
Right. And I'm sure it was so hard too, because like you said, you've seen Florence. It's not as
right,
like intangible. Like you've seen what the possibilities are. So I get it.
I wonder if the first one had failed, I don't think it would have felt as heavy.
Yeah.
If it had come after her,
Yeah.
Because you start to visualize, because I know what she looks like. And I'm thinking, well, maybe they'll look kind of like her. Maybe it's a boy. Like,
right.
We had a boy and a girl left, and I couldn't bring it upon myself to ask.
Right. Okay.
Because now we have one left, and I'm prepping to transfer the last one.
You are. Okay.
Yeah. And we're not going to find out the gender. We didn't with Florence either.
Right.
So, so now I'm just like going into this with eyes wide open. I'm doing everything I can physically, possible to sort of get my body ready. I did an ERA, and I learned that I needed another full day of progesterone, which is interesting because with Florence, I didn't. But I guess after pregnancy, after giving birth, things can change. So
yeah, that's interesting.
I know.
Well, also you're a different person now than you were,
right.
a couple of years ago too. Like, the subtle changes in the body, I think can probably have an effect on that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's, and so now I'm scared, but I'm also like, I was like, there was no question on my mind last time that it was like no question. And so it rocked me when it did it.
Yes. Oh my God. That must've been so tough when you found that out.
Oh yeah. I had a photographer come over like to take photos of our positive pregnancy test that I thought would be.
Wait, you put those on Instagram, right? I remember that.
Yeah. And I told her, cause she was like, Victoria, like, I know it's going to be positive. I know it's going to be positive, but what if it's not? Like, what do you want me to do? And it's like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, just keep shooting. It's fine.
Right.
She's like, are you sure? And I said, yeah. But in my mind, I'm like, but it's going to be positive.
Right.
So,
you're like, duh, it's going to be positive.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and when it wasn't, I was like, what the, and she did keep shooting, and she literally was crying as she's like taking photos.
I'm sure.
But I'm so happy to have those photos because I feel like we still get to honor that grief,
Absolutely.
It's a real thing.
And think about how many people you helped by showing that too. I mean, that was such a real and raw moment that I hadn't seen before anywhere. So I think that's really important that you did that.
Yeah. But now I'm like, gosh, do I, for this time, I'm like, do we just do it more secretly? Do we, like, I'm just trying to protect my heart.
Totally. I know that always, like, once you're kind of a public figure on Instagram with all this stuff, I get it. I wasn't on here when I was going through my journey. Like, I didn't really find it until afterwards, but I always think like, what would I want to share and what wouldn't I want to share? And it's tricky because you're right. Like, you have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself.
Yes.
So
100%.
Yeah.
It's so important. And I actually have like a fertility coach I'm working with right now. Yeah. I have my support group that you know about too. Like I lean on the women.
Definitely.
I'm really just trying to make sure my physical state is in good place, but also my mental,
Yes. Tell me about the coach. What does the coach do and how has it helped?
So she's been really great. Like I kind of fell upon her by accident, and she lives locally here too, which I didn't realize at the time, but She sort of just helps hold you accountable. So she talks about all things, whether it be nutrition, nothing medical. So it's everything but nutrition, sort of mental state, any spirituality, if that's something you want to focus on. And she's just a wealth of knowledge. And she's really helped me just sort of like with the mindfulness of all of this, but also the nutrition side, because I've always sucked at that. Mm-hmm. And so she is like, you need to eat breakfast, Victoria. You can't do this fasting stuff. You got to eat, Mm-hmm. I'm like, I don't have time to eat. She's like, you're going to make a smoothie or something, but you're going to eat.
Right.
And she's like, it's temporary. Just we're on a race here. We got to
Right.
So she checks in with me to make sure I'm eating and doing the right things. And, as a mom, sometimes I forget. I always come last, it's like, I got to make sure Florence has what she needs. And then I'm like, right. Oh, yeah, it's 3:00. All I've had is an iced coffee.
Right. Exactly.
But yeah. And I also know I owe this to myself, in this process to make sure if I really do all the things, to try to give it my best go.
Yeah. So what's the timing on this? You said.
So I've been doing Lupron. This is something new I'm adding. Okay. Because I have endometriosis, like I mentioned. So yeah, I'm on my second month of Lupron, which is a daily injection into the stomach or thigh. Haven't tried the thigh yet, but I'm about to move to the thigh because my stomach is so bruised. I need more space. And so I'm doing this, and then my period comes, and then I start my transfer, which I guess could be September-ish, maybe.
Okay.
But you have to do it. I can't just do 2 months of Lupron and then be like, oh, wait. You have to do it right after.
Right.
You need the Lupron, because otherwise all that hard work would go to waste, which
totally,
that's not happening. This is
right. Can we talk a little bit about your support group too? I know that you've got a lot of super powerful women in these groups that are lifting each other up and helping each other out. How did you decide to start it, and when, and what is it? How has it helped you too?
Yeah, no, it's one of my most prized possessions. When I became a new mom, I was like, holy shit, this is hard. I didn't think it would be this hard. I joined a support group for new moms called the New Mom School in Newport Beach. And it was sort of a framework of teaching. So every class they call it, but every week you go in and they'd have a new instructor that would talk about, everything you need to know as a new mom. But what you really got out of it were all these women who were new moms right along with you. Our babies were days apart from each other. Mm-hmm. And we would just cry. Every week we'd sit there and cry. Our babies were crying and we're crying. And they were just friendships that you made, and people you could text at 3 a.m. to say, what the fuck, this baby? Why do I, totally. Why aren't you sleeping? Is this happening to you? And they're like, yeah, me too. So day 2, day 3, I forget. I met the founder. She was our instructor. And I said, hey, there really needs to be something like this for women who want to become moms. They need this type of support too.
Yeah.
And she knew a little bit about me, and, I'd shared my story with the group, and she said, I totally agree. Do you want to run it? And I was like, what? She's like, you want to use my space? I'll help you out. Let's, it would be your business, but you could use my space. And I said, I'm going to say yes. I know I have a newborn baby right now, but I'm going to say yes. I'll get back to you, but let's do this. She's like, okay. So I, in between naps, put together a plan and a curriculum, and had a friend at the time who used a surrogate sort of help me launch it. And I just did a test. I was like, hey, let's all get together. I got 13 women to just sort of trust me with this idea that I had. And within week 2, I was like, oh yeah, this is going to work. Mm-hmm. It was incredible. And what I didn't expect, to your point earlier, was what I was going to get out of it. I just thought, this is my gift to give to others. I didn't realize how much a gift it would be to me. And I didn't know that these women would be the ones that I would lean on to and learn from. And right. When my field transfer happened, they all got together and sent me flowers, and, people that really understood what I was going through.
Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Victoria. Definitely make sure to check out her ebook, which again is called Why I'm Glad My Eggs Didn't Work. And the subtitle is A Raw, Honest Guide to Motherhood Via Donor Eggs. and you guys can follow her at Expecting Anything on Instagram. And I also wanted to tell you guys that we have some big announcements coming up this week about Fertility Rally Live, which is happening in October. So definitely follow Fertility Rally on Instagram, which is at Fertility Rally. You'll get all the updates there. They're also on our website, which is fertilityrally.com. And one more thing, if you have 2 seconds to go rate and review this podcast, it really helps with the exposure and get noticed. And that way we can help some more people. So thank you so much. I love you all. Talk to you next time. Thanks, Victoria.